Psychology in Seattle.
So, Berto, I thought we would look at news, psychology news, and other kinds of things, and just kind of ramble. What do you say?
Ramble on!
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I develop new formulas for weed killing.
So I thought we would just look at some news here. So this first one is on the Washington Post, and it's 5 myths about psychology.
Oh.
So I just thought we would kind of look at those. What are the common myths, do you think, that they might be listing here?
About psychologists or psychology in general?
Psychology and psychologists.
Okay. Well, one myth might be that when you talk to a psychologist, they're always analyzing you.
Okay. I don't think that's on the list, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely, I get that a lot. I've said on the podcast before that when I'm at some dinner parties with people I don't really know, and I know I'm never going to see them again,
Yeah.
and they ask me what I do, I say I work for Microsoft because no one asks a second question. Whereas when I say I'm a therapist or a professor of psychology, they're always like, "Oh, are you analyzing me?" or they'll launch into like, you know, the analogy of when you approach a doctor and it's like, "Oh, you know, I'm experiencing this pain," and you're just trying to, you know,
Right.
and it's just like, okay.
Yeah, the guy's like, I'm joking. And you're like, dude, I'm just trying to have a dinner with my family.
Yeah, I mean, mostly what it is for people who aren't really in a certain cultural pocket, like they're, you know, I'm sorry to say this, but they're more rural or
Rural jurors.
more non-coastal elite culture. When they meet me and they know I'm a therapist, it really throws them off. Whereas you talk to a Seattleite,
Sure.
they're like, "Oh, you're a
Oh,
therapist."
just like me and just like everyone I know.
Right. They'll just be like, "Oh, that's cool, whatever, moving on in life," you know,
Right.
because they've probably met other therapists
Right.
and they probably go to therapy
Right.
and blah, blah. So it's with these people who aren't really familiar with the profession or somehow they're scared of it. There's just this negativity, I remember years ago, I made the mistake admitting what I actually do. I remember I went to the buffet and I was right across, you know, you had those double buffets where the buffet's on both sides of the table.
Yeah, which is smart.
Yeah. And so I somehow got linked up. I was parallel with someone that I had just told what I did.
Oh, boy.
And she's just like, and just announces there, "So, you know, they say that therapists are the most crazy people on the planet. Is that true? Is that, you know, because, you know, it's probably true, right?"
And shut up, that's not true. Who told you that?
And I just flipped the entire buffet totally. Yeah, it's just like, okay, I don't know how to respond to that,
Right.
given that I don't know you and I don't know all these people, because that's a very complicated question. I want to represent my profession well.
Right.
I don't actually want to answer this question.
Right.
I also think you think that people go to therapy because they're quote unquote messed up instead of just regular things.
Right.
Anyway, what other myths?
Well, you just kind of alluded at one. So, psychology is only for people that are really messed up in the head.
Right. So that is, you know, what does messed up in the head mean exactly? Yeah. If I did just a quick inventory of the clients that I've seen over the past 10 years, there's a chance that very few of them would have qualified for a significant DSM diagnosis.
Right.
Like even just major depression, even though it's pretty common, or any major anxiety disorder.
Right.
Do they all suffer from attachment injuries? Yeah, but those aren't in the DSM. That's just universal. Attachment injuries are universal. Might they qualify for some traits of a personality disorder? Yeah, but most people do.
Sure.
Might they have had a phobia at some point, but that wasn't really the point of the therapy. Yeah. So people who come to therapy with me are people who are wanting to talk about their relationship. They're just like, I'm not really quite sure if I should be married or not, or I just got into this marriage, I'm not sure if it's the right thing, or I feel like I don't really know who I am.
Right.
I just quit my job and I don't really know what I should be doing with the rest of my life. And these might seem like simple questions, but they're not. They involve the way you were raised, they involve the way your parents treated you, They involve whether or not you actually were given a chance to know who you were as a human being. They involve your self-esteem, all these kinds of things. And nothing in there is like stereotypically crazy, right?
The green elephants are telling me to kill the pink unicorns.
Right. So in the Washington Post, the 5 myths, the number one myth that I'm guessing you would have got to eventually is that we only use 10% of our brains.
That's a psychology myth?
Yeah. You've heard that before, right?
I've heard that, but I didn't think of it as a psychology myth, just like a science myth. But sure.
Yeah. So
it's probably because I'm only using 11% of my brain.
Yeah. We use all of our brain. We don't necessarily use all of our brain all the time, but we use all of our brain. And it would be a pretty silly evolutionary joke to play on our species to have one of the most energy hog organs in our body to be so inefficient that we would only, because by definition, you would only need 10% of the brain mass to actually get the job done.
Yeah. So I have heard about this before, and I could be remembering this wrong, but I feel like the whole thing started because in practice, like if you're taking, if you're like measuring brain activity for whatever psychology test or mental test, whatever you're doing, yes, you're not going to be lighting up every single neuron at 100% the whole time. And that just means nothing, and it's kind of like saying we only use, 10% of our blood supply in our feet or something.
Or 10% of our muscles.
Yeah. We only use 10%. We only use like 1% of our muscles.
It's like, well, but you use all your muscles at some point,
And like we were saying in a different episode, evolution and just the way it works is really lazy and rarely just frivolously adds extra appendages and extra things. Sometimes it happens and then those die out over time,
Yeah, I think that this is a popular myth, and it was very strong for a long time. It's only been recently where I think it's finally kind of gotten through to the mainstream public that this is a myth. People still use it, by the way, but people believe in it. But I think it has something to do with the way we used to see, and maybe we still do to some extent, our brains and our psychologies, which is that there's like this vast sea of untapped potential.
Well, because we know that it is real in our daily life. We feel every day like we didn't quite, oh man, I guess I could have practiced an extra hour, or if I had only really done that one thing, I didn't study enough for that test, or I wish I had learned that other language. It's just kind of like this natural feeling of like, oh man, I'm really not pushing myself hard enough. Therefore, I'm probably only using 10% of my brain.
Right. Myth number 2 that Washington Post identifies is talking about your problems always helps. Now, what do you think this one means, Berto? Talking about your problems always helps.
Well, I think, so actually I probably would have fallen victim to this one because I would, if someone said like, what did you find valuable about therapy? One of the things I would have said is, man, really talking about my problems seemed to always help. And I think there is this perception that therapy is about you going to this person and being like, all right, here's everything that's wrong with me in my life right now. And hopefully by talking about it, that's what's going to make it better. And I think there is some truth to that, but maybe there's a lot more subtlety here.
Well, so this one, get ready for a soapbox to occur at this point. So yes, there was this notion. So originally there was this, before Freud and Breuer and all those people, there was this notion that talking about your problems would do nothing. And then psychoanalysis came along and psychotherapy came along, and they started saying, no, actually talking about your problems and talking with a professional actually does help. I mean, even the phrase, so I have a lot of problems with this, quote unquote, talking about your problems. Well, what does that mean exactly? Are they just saying, just talking about your problems?
At the bar.
Because
like, I hate my work and my boss.
Because when people come to me in therapy, they don't just talk about their problems. Like, I'm pointing out things to them. I'm confronting them on things. I'm challenging them. I'm asking them questions that they don't ask themselves.
Right.
Questions like, do you want to spend the rest of your life with this person given the way that they are right now?
Right.
And they'll be like, oh, and they'll avoid the question. I'll be like, no, I just asked you a question. So It's not just talking about your problems. It's a relationship with someone who knows what the fuck they're doing in terms of how to help a human being.
Well, and it's like when I was in therapy and I was essentially really excited about narrating my life story because I'm like, oh, I'm paying this person to be a captive audience. Now I can tell them all about Berto. And I remember she pointed out more than once that actually, maybe counterintuitively, the goal of these sessions weren't for me to just like third person narrate a story like it's some Hollywood blockbuster we're watching together, because that actually is not the point, right? And so I would have to, like, a lot of what we worked on in my case was being more in the moment and talking about what's going on with me right now and those things. And then naturally through that, we would talk about, you know, experiences from my past, memories, things that certainly would influence my present, rather than what I wanted to do is, well, it all began back in the early 1975s.
And let me ask you, did all that therapy help you?
Absolutely.
Right. So,
Well, I mean, all of it as a together did, but not every single little bit of it helped, but all together it did, yeah.
right. You went to therapy for a number of years.
Yeah.
You, at the end, you knew yourself better. You felt better. You had better self-esteem.
Yes.
You were less involved in your defensive activities against self-esteem.
What is that supposed to mean?
Yeah. You had less self-destructive behaviors. You were more nicer to other people. You were more empathetic. You were more empathetic to yourself. You were more honest.
Right.
There were a lot of things that were better about you. And so therapy helps. Now, let's look at this bit here, because I see this notion out there, even in my own profession, and it drives me nuts. So there are 3 paragraphs, and it usually follows this stupid progression. They always have to start with Freud. So it's like, just over a century ago, Sigmund Freud popularized the notion of the quote-unquote talking cure, now known as psychotherapy. Freud said, and then it kind of goes on to talk about Freud's very antiquated ideas about what things, because, you know, granted, he was operating without any research that we have today, and he was basically inventing an entire field.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he had some weird ideas, and some of them were not quite as nuanced as we have them today. So,
by the way, this always bugged me about not knowing enough myself, but, you know, like this general disdain for Freud.
yeah.
It's like, sure. And I'm disdainful of Isaac Newton. How could he have gotten relativity wrong? You
Right.
know?
Even Einstein himself didn't believe in spooky action at a distance.
Right.
There, and any genius will be wrong about
That's stupid, Galileo.
Yeah, I mean, every genius today is going to be wrong about something. We're going to find in 500 years that they were wrong about something.
Right.
So just pointing towards something that they're wrong about in the past doesn't say that they're all stupid. It means that they were probably, you know, it's like pointing towards our founding fathers and saying, well, they're all complete hypocrites and morons because some of them had slaves.
Right.
But it's like when you compare the heads of states of the colonies to Europe, which is where they all came from, they were the most progressive.
Right.
And even though only 5% of the population could vote at the time, that was by far the biggest vote. It was the biggest democracy. So, you know, just looking at things in isolation, you have to look at it in history, and looking at Freud in today's point of view is ridiculous. You have to look at Freud during his time. He was, you know, eons beyond what was going on at the time. They were still literally bleeding people during this time. They were physicians were looking at people who were depressed, and they were opening up their veins and bleeding their blood to try to cure them. And they thought that was working. So let's just give Freud a little break here. Okay.
By the way, 500 years from now, they're going to be doing a lecture at some space university. And they're like, you know, people get things wrong all the time. For example, look at this clip from 500 years ago. And it's you going, 500 years from now, there will be all these geniuses right now, and they'll have been wrong about stuff. It's like, this poor idiot didn't realize that this was the first time in history where no one was wrong about anything except for him.
What are you talking about, Berto? People are doing that as we speak on YouTube right now. In fact, I guarantee you, someone is writing on YouTube right now that bleeding treatment
does actually help because it lowers your blood pressure.
Well, one, and it was didn't exist during Freud's time, but it did. It existed well into the 20th century. It wasn't very common, but anyway.
Misattribution is. As we've said many times before, it's like we look for patterns. We're pattern-seeking machine. Yeah. And accidentally we're like, oh, that seemed to do a thing. Do that again.
Yeah. So with this myth in the Washington Post, talking about your problems is always helpful. That's a myth. And then it goes into talk about Freud. Okay, whatever. And then the second paragraph is to talk about someone who I actually respect quite a bit, who is... I can't remember his name, but they're talking about painful experiences, however, is not guaranteed to be helpful. Consider critical incident stress debriefing, a group counseling protocol for people who have witnessed traumatic events. A meta-analysis, all published, blah, blah, blah. I can't remember his name. It's like Julian something, but his last name. But anyway, so the second paragraph, so the first paragraph is like, Freud was dumb and he thought that talking was great. Yeah. The second paragraph, they find a extremely specific form of therapy that was used for probably just like 1,000 people in all of history, which is critical incident stress debriefing, where they thought that people right after a traumatic event like 9/11, they would force people into group therapy. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just talking. It was like, you have to be in group therapy. And members would be like, can I leave? I don't want to be a part of this. This is kind of overwhelming for me. And they would say, no, you can't leave. Well, guess what? For some people, that made them worse.
Yeah, of course.
So it's not just therapy. It was like a very specific form. And research found that it was actually not always helpful, that it actually had a pretty bad success to failure rate. And so that's not an indictment on the talking cure.
Right.
That's an indictment on a very specific and form of therapy that honestly, if I was asked to do, I would not have done. No. Even if people were like, this is evidence-based, I would have been like, I'm not going to force people into therapy. Yeah. That's just not my thing. Scott Lilienfeld, that's his name. Then they go on to the third paragraph. So so anyone who doesn't know what they're reading will go like, ooh, Sigmund Freud was dumb. Talking cure is dumb. Ooh, they found that talking is actually bad. I mean, there's already enough of this going on in society.
By the way, really quick point about it's evidence-based. Well, because ends don't justify the means. So, for example, it's true that I guess if you forcefully put a lot of humans into a camp where they had to only eat the perfect things and exercise the perfect amount, other than the stress of being in such incarceration, they might be fairly healthy compared to another control group. So what?
Yeah.
You stripped their freedom, right?
But even then, it still wasn't good for these people. Their PTSD symptoms were worse. In the end, so the third paragraph, in an important 2007 paper, Psychology Treatments That Cause Harm, Emory professor Scott Lilienfeld highlighted a growing body of evidence that talk therapy, although helpful for many, can sometimes backfire. So, okay, that is true, but again, we're talking about very few people in very few types of treatments.
So it's funny. So let me understand. This article is, hey, here are 5 myths about psychology.
Yeah.
Okay.
The first one is great.
And the first one's great. But
10% of our brain.
But this is why, what's weird about it is I didn't think that this was even a myth. I've never heard people go like, the thing about psychology is we only use 10% of our brain, right? Like I've never heard those connected. But
I have.
But on the second one, what's weird is that
don't you remember that Bradley Cooper movie?
Yeah, but that wasn't like about psychology. That was about brain. Same thing with the Scarlett Johansson movie.
What organ do you think involves psychology?
No. What I mean what the right analogy would be like misconceptions about heart surgery, right? And one of them is that people think that only half the heart pumps blood. But that has nothing to do with heart surgery. That's just like a misconception about the heart.
I think they're using a more broader definition.
Okay. And then the second one, what's interesting to me is, as you pointed out, yes, if people were under the assumption, like I guess I could have been, that the main thing is to just talk about your problems. Yes, that's way oversimplifying it, and that alone is not probably going to yield results. But what's interesting is you're pointing out that all the evidence for this being a myth is really like bad evidence.
Right. But if you don't know, if you're just a casual reader, even if you're a clinician, this would be compelling. So the final two sentences is what really pissed me off. About 10% of psychotherapy patients get worse during treatment, and only about half get better. So we'll just take that for a second. 10% of patients get worse during treatment, and only half get better.
Did it say 10 or 2? 10%.
10%.
Okay.
So, and only about half get better. Okay. So
half of your patients get better.
So, right. So when, again, to the uninitiated, they read this, they're like, whoa, 10% of people get worse during treatment? Okay. So when you have arthritis and you have pain in your knee and you get a knee replacement,
right,
there's a certain percentage of people that get worse.
Right. There's
some people who even die because the anesthesia kills them.
Right.
Does that mean we don't do the arthritis surgery?
Well, and I'm sure. So first of all, even though I'm going to put aside the fact that it's a 5-to-1 success ratio so far,
right,
and that's not even counting whether the other percentages were just neutral, but let's assume. And now the other assumption here is that they fully correlated the cause of their getting worse was the therapy.
Exactly. If you are getting depressed, like your mom just died,
right,
and you're pretty demoralized and you're just like, I was really connected to my mom, I'm really depressed, I go to therapy, and now you start talking about your mom, and you know what? A month later, 5 months later, it's kind of worse because now the full weight of the knowledge that your mom is really gone is starting to hit you, and your depression is worse. Well, by definition, the therapy has failed. So this notion of like connecting treatment. So, and the other thing is like, people will come to me, just my small sliver of the sort of clients I get, with issues with their marriage, for example.
Right.
Well, if they're in individual therapy, I'm not treating their marriage. I'm treating the individual. So they come to me by what? So let me just ask you, Berto, how would we numerically measure whether or not, so how many years were you in therapy?
I was like off and on for like a decade.
Okay.
And most of that was.
So let's take the first year.
Yeah.
And what numerical measure would have demonstrated to these kinds of scientific thinking people that therapy was working or not working?
I'm sure they did a 10 to 20 year analysis. No, I mean, I'm being facetious. So they would have probably had to do a self-reporting of some sort.
They would ask you,
yeah,
was it helpful? But actually, this sort of stuff, the 10% of psychotherapy patients getting worse, a lot of times what they're thinking of is depression or anxiety.
And what time frame?
Yeah, usually it's because it's hard. I mean, there's varying time frames, but
that's what I'm saying.
Shorter the better because it's easier to pay for. Usually like 10, 20 weeks.
I guess I don't know if they have this one on the list, but that would be another huge misconception, that going to therapy is like going to the doctor for like a broken finger or something.
Right. So when you go to the physician with a broken finger and you complain that you can't move your finger, and you complain that it's in pain, and then you get treatment, and then 6 months later you can move your finger and it's no longer in pain.
Right.
And you can lift this amount of weight with that finger. Right. Well, that's a numeric. It lends itself towards numerical observation.
Right.
Quantitative observation much more than Berto going into therapy with a lifetime of attachment injuries and a lifetime of self-destruction and a lifetime of denying his feelings and a lifetime of acting like everything's fine. And then a year of a therapist slowly trying to help Humberto think about who he is, slow down, acknowledge his hurts, think about his pain. A year later, he might be less happy.
And by the way, even with all these caveats and all these things, half of them still got better.
Right. So then the last fucking sentence is the one that gets to me, because this has so much power in my field. So, they're like 10% of psychotherapy patients get worse during treatment and only half get better. One reason, Many therapists do not use evidence-based techniques and procedures shown to be effective in clinical trials.
Oh, wow.
So I can't tell you how fucking angry this sentence makes me. Now, do you
Red
have
alert.
Do you have any idea what that sentence means?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're saying that most therapists wing it based on, some book they read or some class they remember.
Yeah.
And they don't look at studies and meta-analysis, and they don't evolve their techniques or basically use science at all.
Well, so if that were true, I'd get behind that. But that's not actually what they mean.
What do they mean?
When the phrase evidence-based techniques is relegated to a few of what is actually shown to be effective by research. So just broadly speaking, I'll give you like four different main categories of therapy. You have psychodynamic therapy or history-based therapy and defenses and personality-based therapy. The way I talk tends to be more of a psychodynamic person. You have humanistic therapy, which is a lot of listening and a lot of self-empowerment kind of stuff. You have what is generally called cognitive behavioral therapy, and then you have family therapy as well. But I'll just stick to cognitive behavioral therapy, even though there's two different things. These cognitive and behavioral therapies involve, rather in its most systematic form, a very systematic form of therapy where you have logs and you think about the exact precipitants to this or that. Like I'm trying to quit smoking. Okay, well, let's look at, what happens. Okay, well, when I had a craving this week, I drank coffee. Oh, so does coffee lead to you smoking? It kind of seems like it does. Okay, well, then stop drinking coffee.
Right.
Okay, I stopped drinking coffee. Well, I smoked a cigarette and I felt really bad about myself, and so I smoked a couple more. Okay, you smoked a cigarette. Why did you look at that as a huge failure and a huge problem with your self-esteem, and then you're more likely to use again? We need to change that thought. And so, it's very systematic. Now that you've never been in a therapy session like that before.
No.
One, because the therapists that you work with weren't like that. And two, you didn't come to therapy with a problem like that.
No.
You came to therapy with something that lends itself towards humanistic and psychodynamic therapy.
I could have gone to therapy with something like, I'm spending too much money on clothes.
But that's not why you went. But that's not why you went to therapy. So the situation is that when they look at so in my industry, unfortunately, there's a lot of infighting, and you have these different theoretical orientations. You have psychodynamic people, you have brief people, you have family people, you have humanistic people, you have Gestalt people, you have Rogers people, you have cognitive people, you have behavioral people.
Your crap people.
You have, trauma-focused people. You have, I don't know, there's so many different, schools of thought. And what ends up happening is that everyone's so, worried about they're not going to get enough clients is that they'll lose some legitimacy or something. So when one group develops research that shows that they're very effective with a particular thing, they want to advertise that.
I see.
So the cognitive and behavioral people have demonstrated that their model works really well with depression and anxiety. In fact, when you manualize, meaning that you develop a manual in which you instruct the clinician to follow a certain protocol, they find that it lends itself to manualization much more.
Right.
And therefore it lends itself to research much more. And it actually is very effective.
Consistency, so you can...
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard to be consistent with psychodynamic thinking. It's hard to be consistent with humanistic thinking. I mean, think about the therapy that you went through with your therapist. How would you manualize that form of therapy? Plus, you did it over 10 years.
Yeah.
So you can't have a manualized therapy that's 10 years long.
Right.
You have to have a manualized therapy that's only like 10 weeks long.
Yep.
Well, CBT lends itself to 10, 20-week trials. And so, quote unquote, science has shown that CBT is very effective with certain kinds of things, like depression, like anxiety.
I see. So they're saying if all therapists maybe adopted these specific techniques, maybe we'd be having a conversation.
What are you saying?
It sounds like they're saying if all therapists adopted these proven techniques, maybe we'd be having a conversation.
A conversation of what?
In the colloquial meaning of that's why this myth exists.
That's why this myth exists.
Yeah. So the myth is that
Right,
talking
exactly.
about your problems helps. And they're saying, well, maybe if they were talking about their problems with therapists that followed these proven techniques,
Right.
it would help.
Right. So there are certain people in our industry, particularly cognitive behavioral people,
Right.
who will say that the only evidence-based treatment is cognitive behavioral therapy.
see.
But there is tons of scientific, empirical, lab-based, observation-based research that demonstrates that psychodynamic therapy is effective with clients.
Which is why I was surprised when you said that you would get behind if that's what they had meant, that they weren't basing it on.
Right.
Because I'm like, I bet you there is plenty of science and research.
Right. Getting back to what you said like, oh, well, this is probably saying that if you're using the research to inform your therapy, then that's good. And if you're not, then that's not good. I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, I misunderstood
But
your
what they're saying is, and they're not saying this directly,
Yeah.
and maybe I'm accusing them of something that's not really happening, but I've seen this, but I've never seen someone say evidence-based technique
Outside of that context.
and not refer to cognitive behavioral therapy, even though if we're using the definition of evidence-based, then humanistic and psychodynamic should be included.
Sure.
Now, certain kinds of things don't lend themselves to, like if someone had a phobia of heights,
Right.
and someone said, well, I'm a Jungian therapist, I would say, well, that's probably not going to help.
Yeah.
I would say they need a behavioral therapist to do exposure, or they need a therapist like me who integrates everything and can involve behavioral techniques such as exposure to treating them. Now, very, very few clients show up to therapy and say, all I have to work on is depression, or all I have to work on is a phobia. Very, very few clients. Most clients come in because they have low self-esteem and they're upset and their life isn't going that well. Well, how do you measure whether or not therapy is working in that situation?
Well, absolutely. So as an example, I've mentioned before, the reason I even started going to therapy, it wasn't even like, you know what, my life, I'm not even sure where it's going. I should probably, no, it wasn't that at all. I'm watching Harry Potter 2, and in the middle of the movie, I think I'm having a heart attack. And I freak out, and I rush out of the theater, and I'm realizing that with the last few minutes I have left to live, I might want to go into Bartell's and take my blood pressure, because that's a good use of my last few minutes of time. So I do, and my blood pressure is like normal. And I'm like, oh, that's a weird way to die, with normal blood pressure but a heart attack. Okay, well, I wonder why I didn't call 911 already. But anyways, And then the next day I go to the doctor, or 2 days later I go to the medical doctor, and they do a full body analysis, whatever. And she's like, yeah, you're fine, but you may have had a panic attack. I'm like, oh, whoa, what? And then you might want to talk to a therapist about it. And then I'm like, okay, no, but really?
So even with you, even though you went to therapy for a discrete reason, I had a panic attack.
Yeah.
What you quickly realized, you and your therapist, was that was just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
That what was really going on was a denial of yourself, a lifetime of trauma that you needed to recover from, and just a lot of compassionate self-care techniques that you would never even thought you deserved or that you could have. And so how do you measure whether or not therapy worked or not? Well, I can tell you that your therapist did not, quote unquote, use any evidence-based treatment protocols, but therapy sure did work for you.
Yeah.
And so this Washington Post portion right here just drives me up the wall. One, Sigmund Freud was not an idiot. Two, identifying one therapy technique that no one uses anymore and very few people use to begin with, as like an indictment on talk therapy is stupid. To point to the fact that 10% of psychotherapy patients get worse. Now, what I will say is that some therapists don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Sure.
And they're doing, even if they're you can use the protocols of CBT and fuck someone up.
Right.
So there's plenty.
But all doctors know what they're doing, and all yoga trainers and all CrossFit trainers know what they're doing.
Right. So as in any industry, you're going to have, now I will say there's maybe a little bit higher level of quackery in my profession because there's not a lot of regulation on this sort of thing. Whereas if you're in the medical field, if you work in family medicine and you're doing like energy healing or something, like you'll pretty quickly get, booted out of your job. Whereas in my field, like you could be doing anything and you're probably not going to get, in trouble for it. So there's issues, believe me, anyone who listens to this podcast, I have taken emails and railed about other therapists who don't know what they're doing. And so I'm not going to say that our industry is without problems, but the notion that talking about your problems always help is a myth. One misunderstands like the statement, and also like misunderstands therapy in general, and also misunderstands the notion of evidence in our society. So it's been, I think, 45 minutes. We've only gotten to 2 myths out of 5, Berto, and I have like 10 other articles I want to talk about. Let's take a break and try to race through this. What do you say? All right, we're back from the break. We have a number of different things we want to announce. So we have our second Psychology in Seattle scholarship, which is for $2,500, and it is due June 30th, 2019. Go to our website, fill out the form to apply. When you fill out the essay, really try to answer those questions in full. Some people are answering them very shortly, very briefly, and I just have to say, it's not very compelling when you just provide a couple sentences. I want to see a full kind of essay. You're trying to convince me and Berto and Stacy to give you $2,500 in relation to other people.
And just understand that I have a vested interest in you not doing that great, because if no one gets the prize, we're going to get the $2,500, cash it out in $1 bills, maybe $2, but at least $1 bills, and I'm going to swim like Scrooge McDuck.
Not true. We've already had some people apply, so someone's getting that money, even if they don't really deserve it.
But I wanted the Scrooge.
The best, no. But if last wave is any indication, we're going to have a really hard time choosing. Also, know that Berto and I are on Discord now. If you don't know what Discord is, it's essentially just a forum to chat.
That sounds like we're not getting along right now. Parrot and I we have some announcements. Parrot and I are on Discord. We're
getting a Discord. Kids, when a man and a woman, wait, who's the woman? So Discord, it's mainly for gamers, but it actually can be used by anybody. It's really pretty fun. 1, you can interact with all the other listeners, and 2, I'm going to be on there every Thursday at 2 for an hour, Seattle time. So 2 o'clock, whatever hour it is for you, 2 o'clock Seattle time. I'm going to be on there answering your questions. So it's kind of an opportunity to get real-time answers and real-time interaction. But really, what I hope is that eventually enough people will be on there where you'll be interacting all the time throughout the week.
Just watch out for trolls. That's the only caveat.
Such as Humberto. Humberto likes to troll people. You're on there more than just that Thursday, right?
It has been rumored that I fly in and out like a crow being warged on by someone.
So another thing is we have a Facebook fan page that I don't go to.
Is it a crow or a raven? A raven.
Three-eyed raven?
Yeah. Raven.
But then there's the crow. No, they have raven. Send a raven.
Okay,
yeah.
So right.
We have a fan page on Facebook. We also have a regular Facebook page where we play Tuesday Tougher Bluff, which is pretty fun. And we also post a lot of different things. We have an Instagram. Please follow us on Instagram. We try to post as much as we can. Stacy's posting more things, behind the scenes photos, that kind of thing. We also have a YouTube channel, and Berto has a YouTube channel, Psycho Berto. We also have our website. People sometimes have trouble accessing archived episodes. I implore you to go to the website. I get emails every day.
Employed? Are you going to employ them?
I get emails every day from people saying, I can't access this episode from 2 years ago. And I'm like, go to the website. Oh, it's so great there. Another email. How do I access old episodes on Patreon? Go to the website. It's like, so I assume you're listening out there, listeners. Go to the website. Even if you don't want to see anything, see the options. All the episodes are there categorized. Even if you're a patron, the patron episodes are also on 2 different pages.
But what if they want to see old episodes?
See, there's that raven flying in for the troll. Okay, so let's go to another myth. Myth number 3, OCD manifests as hyper-organization. What do you think about that myth?
I guess I wouldn't have. When I was younger and I heard about OCD, a lot of times I heard about it in conjunction with cleanliness and like washing their hands a lot. I guess I would have thought, oh, they must also be really organized. But I don't know if I would have made that connection. But I could see how that's a thing.
Right. So I did a whole episode on this a few months ago, that we need to stop saying, oh my God, I'm so OCD. I like it when all my pencils are in a row. It's like, you're not, obsessive compulsive disorder is a really horrible disorder. I mean, it ruins people's lives. It is awful. And yeah, it can involve cleanliness and orderliness, but it gets to a level of almost delusion.
This is like The Aviator, right? Like the Twilight Zone episode, like the Creep Show. I mean, isn't it Creep Show?
I don't know.
What's the one where the guy is like a millionaire and he keeps thinking all these flies are getting into his clean room? And
I don't know. I mean, The Aviator.
I think it's Creep Show.
I don't know the Creep Show.
And The Aviator.
Myth number 4. Mood swings are the hallmark of bipolar disorder.
Mood swings are the hallmark of bipolar disorder. Well, I think that bipolar disorder has things that appear as extreme different kinds of moods or almost even personality traits. But I could see how that's a simplification, a vast simplification.
Right, exactly. It's a simplification. People will look to someone who at one moment is happy seeming, and at the next moment they're angry.
Oh, you're just so bipolar.
Right, and it's like, nope, that's not bipolar.
I am bipolar. It's just because of my OCD.
Now, getting back to the OCD thing, if you want to say you're compulsive kind of about something, like I'm kind of compulsive about my house being clean, or I'm kind of compulsive about my pencils being in a row. Like, you could say that. Or I'm kind of obsessive about my house being in order. Like, I kind of obsess on that. You can talk about that. But to say OCD, you're really claiming it rises above a certain threshold that is very high.
What if you're like, look, because I only use 10% of my brain, but I know that I need to talk about this out loud because it'll help me. I have to tell you that I'm very OCD about the fact that... Actually, what was the fifth one? Have we gotten to the fifth one?
No.
Okay. Well, then I will wait to make this joke. I will repeat the whole thing again.
Oh, God. Number 5, medication is the way to fix a chemical imbalance.
I need medication to fix my... What was the fourth one?
Bipolar?
Bipolar disorder.
Yeah. Then all your myths would fold in on each other and the world would implode. Medication is the way to fix a chemical imbalance. So this one I actually didn't read before. Medicines have a place in the armament of psychiatric treatments, true. But there are many other ways to changing the brain's neurochemical profile, also true. Yeah, okay. Let's move on to the next article.
That seems also like, that's like another myth. Drugs, medical drugs help you get better.
Well, that's essentially what the myth
it's like,
is.
yes, sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, if only they helped as much as society thinks they help, because for some people they do, for sure, but for many they don't. All right, Psychology Today article. Why are so many young people so unhappy?
Why are so many young persons so unhappy?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I didn't know is this a trend that's been observed?
So that's a good question. Now,
or are we talking about historically in general? It seems like younger people are more unhappy than older people.
Like seems?
It seems, or have there, like, is this kind of like they're just asking, or it's like, hey, as we've seen in plenty of surveys, younger people are more unhappy than older people. Why is that?
Well, one, how do we measure happiness? That's impossible. What they're really pointing to is disorders like depression and anxiety. And we do have some data, because we started looking at large populations along these lines, decades ago. So we can kind of compare like rates of major depression among 16-year-olds of today compared to 40 years ago. And there seems to be some increase in suicidality and also depression and anxiety. Now, here's the thing. Measurement of these things, as I think I've been talking about before, is really hard to do. You have to have people, you in order to really know the answer to this question, one, there would have to be some kind of biological marker that like says this person has depression and this person doesn't.
Right.
Because everyone's on some kind of gradient when it comes to depression. So you have to draw the line somewhere, right? The other thing is in different times, clinicians will think differently about the disorder. Mm-hmm. So maybe 40 years ago, they had a much higher threshold than they do today. The way that training programs teach clinicians to assess major depression, is it possible that they teach a different vibe today than they did 40 years ago? Absolutely. Today, you have, anyway.
Yeah.
So the numbers could be that they're increasing, but it's hard to know. Now most people would like go, well, clearly in my experience, people are getting more depressed, lately than they were in the past. Well, I'll tell you from my anecdotal experience, I've been treating teenagers. I started treating teenagers for many years. Kids were very depressed 25 years ago. I treated a lot of depressed kids 25 years ago, a lot of anxious kids. And so, I don't know. It's just hard to know. Now, I'll kind of go with them because I think that what's one of the reasons why, if they were becoming more depressed and anxious, what would be the reason?
Oh, yeah. So our technological advancement has moved so fast that there are no good models for us to cope with the change. And the younger generations are exposed to more of those advancements sooner and more frequently. So, for example, the internet, video games, and computers in general have enabled people to experience things that absolutely had never been experienced in the history of our planet. And many of them are negative. So, for example, if you're online today as a teenager or young adult, you are exposed to some of the most horrific imagery and sentiments and conversations at all times, at any time of the day or night, and as much as you would want.
And some of them are directed at you.
Yeah.
Like you're on Facebook and,
right.
Imagine just for you and me, when we were 13 and there was a kid at school who was just think of like one of the kids who was generally bullying other kids or would talk shit about other people.
Right.
Imagine if she or he could have Facebook and just blast a statement about you. Like, did you see Humberto's shoes today?
Right.
Oh my God, it was totally blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Whereas back then they would just say it to 5 of their friends in isolation, and that would but imagine being able to blast it on the internet. And then imagine you in your 13-year-old mind, back then in school, if they made fun of you, you'd be like, well, at least they didn't cost that much money, like you would have some terrible response. Right. But again, only 3 people would hear it. Imagine you're on, Instagram or whatever.
And it's immortalized.
And you're like, well, at least they didn't cost as much as your shoes, and you think it's a sick burn. And now the entire internet, it becomes a meme, Imagine how horrific that would be for a 13-year-old. So yeah, I totally agree with that. That like the one thing we can, I'm less, I think that's an issue for sure. But research shows that kids are actually still being bullied in person, actually more often than they're being bullied online. So although cyber situations are happening, the kids are still being shitty to each other in face to face. What I think another factor is that we are, one, as a society, exposing ourselves to way too many strangers. We talked about this in other episodes where so just imagine for yourself, like in an extreme example, for the next 2 years, you don't get to see any of your loved ones. You don't get to talk to them.
Right.
Your entire family, your spouse, your kids, your cousins, your aunts, your parents, your friends, your colleagues, like you're ripped away to some foreign planet and now you have to interact with like all new people for 2 years.
Right.
Do you think you're going to be a little stressed out?
I can speak from experience. Yes.
Yeah. So that is the world. Now, if I went 200 years ago, or even just 60 years ago, and went to someone and said, okay, I know right now you see basically the same set of people all day long for, you have your brothers and sisters, you have your parents, you have your aunt and uncles, your grandparents live in the house with you.
Right.
Your town is only 500 people, particularly 150 years ago.
Right.
There's no telephone, there's no internet, there's no postal service. You got to walk everywhere. You know your neighbors, everyone knows you.
And by the way, so really quick parentheses. Statistically, sadly, you may have gotten the short straw and your little pocket was horrible, but not all pockets were horrible.
No. And I would venture to say that being ripped away from everyone is probably worse than actually just living in a consistent horrible pocket. Who knows? But anyway, barring being like abused and blah, blah, blah. But so now I go back 150 years and I go to someone and I'm like, okay, 25-year-old man, imagine this. You now live in a world where you talk to your parents once every 3 months. You actually never see their face, but maybe you see them once every 6 months. Your wife, you see her maybe for an hour in the evening.
Yeah.
And you're like frantically trying to clean up the house and get the kids in bed.
Right.
You only see your kids maybe 3 hours a day, maybe 8 hours on Saturday and Sunday. And even then you're running errands and you're driving around and you're trying to get something set up for someone's birthday party. And
you see your brother and sister maybe once a year for Christmas.
Right. And the vast majority of people you see, you don't really know that well. Like 50% of the humans you see are complete strangers. And the most people you spend time with are people at work and you really don't know them very well at all.
Right.
That person would be like, oh my God, that sounds like hell.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't survive. In the same way of the scenario I said for you, they would say, I couldn't survive in a world like that.
Right.
Well, and he'd be right. We can't survive in a world like this.
Right.
This is why, for example, me and Berto get together and talk into this microphone. One of the things we get out of it is human contact with someone that we trust, someone that we like.
Right.
Supposedly, right?
Well, I do it because talking about your problems always helps.
So the benefit of me and Humberto a couple times a week, talking for a couple hours, chatting, is enriching to me and something that I value. And, so...
Which I think, by the way, is the reason why podcasts like ours resonate with people. Because after hours and hours and hours, you actually kind of feel like you know a couple of new people.
Interesting. Hadn't thought of that. Makes total sense. I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely potentially something that could be happening that could cause more young people to be depressed and anxious. Now, I will say that I'm not quite convinced that young people are more anxious and depressed than they were before. It's hard to measure. The other thing is that we have a lot of positive changes in our society that we have to acknowledge. One is there's a lot more parenting education. There's a lot more, especially when compared to like 50 years ago when we were teaching these extremely horrific practices for young children on attachment issues, which I won't get into. But also like propping up men and saying, hey, men, good fathers spend good quality time with their kids. They don't just go to work all day, which is what was the dominant paradigm 40, 50 years ago. We also have better health care. We have, there's just a lot of good things that our modern society gives us that make it so that kids have a better time. But I definitely do think that our anonymous society is not a good thing. So imagine how happy our kids would be if we devised our society in a way that negates this need to constantly have to impress all these strangers all the time. I mean, honestly, one of the things that I guess I'm recommending is that teens don't use the internet.
Yeah.
Or if they do, it's only with like 10 people.
Severely limit your exposure to those toxic parts of technology.
And like my mom, when she went to school before high school, the school is like kindergarten to 8th grade. And the kindergarten class that she went to, kindergarten, first grade class, the same group of kids were in the same class. They just rotated in different teachers.
Wow.
So imagine, and one of her classmates was Craig T. Nelson. You know Craig T. Nelson?
Yeah.
From Coach.
Yeah.
So my mom and Coach know each other really well.
Oh my God.
And to this day, they have like class reunions, but not for their high school, or they do, but no one goes to that. What they go to is this class reunion. Because imagine,
oh my God,
for 8 years,
right,
the same 25 kids.
Yeah, that was like me in school in Columbia.
They did that in Columbia?
Basically, because I went with the same group of kids from first grade till I left, and I would have graduated with them. So it's no surprise that the WhatsApp group from my school, from those few, my graduating year plus or minus one, is super tight. They have this constant conversation going.
Yeah.
I unfortunately only participate from a periphery because I wasn't there those last 2 years. But
right. So you wonder why they don't do that. Like, what's the problem? Like, why couldn't you do that? So anyway, we don't focus enough on it, I think. I think we've gotten used to the way our society is, and we're just like, well, this is just how it is, you know? Or kids just have to learn. It's like this. It's not natural. All right. Next article here, Psychology Today. Can't find a psychotherapist who accepts insurance. Here's why. So, did you know that this is a problem?
I actually started running into this problem when I was still in therapy. At first, the first few years, everything was covered. It seemed like, everything was great. Then all of a sudden, my insurance didn't quite cover, like it was all that. Now all of a sudden it was out of network. Then I had to like pay, and then after a while I had to I started having to jump through hoops and stuff like that. And it seemed like, wait, what's going on? Why are things getting worse?
Well, I don't know if it's getting better or worse or whatever, but there are many people out there, and I communicate with some of them, who will say that they're desperately looking for a therapist.
Yeah.
And their insurance, they'll find someone they like, they call them, and the person's like, oh, I don't accept insurance anymore, or I'm full, or I don't take it anymore, and they can't afford to pay out of pocket because it could be upwards of $100, $200 an hour.
Right.
And so they need to use their insurance, and their insurance isn't being accepted. So I am actually kind of rare because I actually do accept some insurance. I accept only one, actually. It's Primera. But do you know why? But a lot of my colleagues, in fact, even people right out of graduate school, like refuse to accept insurance. Do you know why they refuse to accept insurance?
I don't.
Because, do you have any idea?
Okay. So basically the therapists themselves say, I will not accept insurance.
Right. You have to pay me directly.
Okay. Maybe because the insurance companies end up causing them way too much trouble and like refuse payment often or something like that.
Yeah, there's certainly that. But the main reason is because insurance will cap the fee. So
I see.
So now we have to define what accepting insurance is.
I remember I had to do that. So I had to make this agreement where it would we would charge part of it to the insurance, and I would pay the rest out of pocket.
Right. So there's out of network and in network. Yeah. Now, this actually, although the specifics don't apply to other countries like Canada or Germany or something, but this principle still applies. Like I was just on the phone with someone in Germany who was talking about how it was hard to find a therapist out there because it's socialized medicine, and you can certainly pay for it privately, but if you go through the socialized medicine program, you get put on this like months of waiting list, essentially. And so, sure, there's free medicine, but you have to wait a long time.
Right.
Anyway, and who wants to wait, months to
you have a problem right now.
And what if that therapist isn't very good and you have to wait another few months to find another one, So anyway, this is kind of a problem in a lot of different societies. But what I'll say is that there are two different ways of doing insurance. One is that to be in network. So for example, I'm in network with Primera Blue Cross, which is a Washington outfit. And so when someone at their place of work, they have Primera Blue Cross, or they pay for it themselves, and they come to me and they have Primera, I by contract have to use Primera if they have it. If they don't have Premera, if they have Regents Blue Shield, or they have Aetna, or they have Kaiser Permanente or something, then I don't have to use that insurance, and I'm out of network. So I can use their insurance, but I don't have to. I can charge my fee, which is $150, and then this is getting into kind of the weeds. But essentially, the point is that when I'm in network and in insurance, I have to lower my fee to what Premera says is the maximum allowed amount for the fee, which is $116. So I go from $150 an hour to $116 an hour. The only reason why I allow Premera is because they allow the highest amount.
Oh, wow.
Like Regents is like 90, Cigna is like 50.
Wow.
So yeah, imagine that. My fee is $150. I used to accept Cigna, I would only get $50. That includes the copay. So Cigna would only pay like $30 and the copay would be 20 more bucks. And so so there's this huge incentive once you kind of get your career going to be like, I'm not taking Cigna anymore. I'm not taking Regents anymore.
And you can't do a thing where you say, look, I will take it, but I'll also charge you more.
You can if you're out of network.
If you're out of network.
But the problem when you're out of network is that to the client, they still have to pay. Like if someone with Cigna came to me and they did out of network, they would probably have to pay like the client would have to pay me like $120.
But they would have to pay you more if they didn't try to use the insurance.
Right. So they get a bit of a discount.
Yeah.
But not a lot. You know what I mean? Like and sometimes there's deductibles without a network and blah blah blah. And so these, Psychology Today article, can't find a psychologist who accepts insurance, here's why. And the why is that now some people will be like $150 an hour, that's insane. Yeah. Like $50 an hour, that should be fine, right? Well, here's the thing. Most therapists don't see 40 clients a week.
Right.
Because if they did, their brain would explode. It's really hard to do.
Right. You're not working every single. Wow, that would be. Oh my God, that's like worse than ER.
Right. Most therapists, in my experience, have 20 to 25.
And that sounds like a lot to me.
That is a lot. 25 hours
of listening and listening and listening and listening. Oh my God.
And that's in addition to paperwork and like other kinds of business activities. You have to do your taxes.
Oh my God.
Now, the other thing is when you're in private practice, because that's what most therapists are, is that you have to pay for your own insurance. Right. Your own health insurance. Right. Do you know how much health insurance costs today?
A lot of potatoes.
Like, do you have any guess?
$1,000.
Yeah, it's like $1,000 a month, and could be more.
So when I was,
it's cheap. Like $700 a month is cheap.
When I was self-employed, which I was for a little bit, when I wasn't doing my current profession that I've done for 15 years.
Which is what?
What do you mean?
What was your current profession?
What are you talking about?
Well, what's your current job?
That's silly. I'm not going to justify that with an answer. My point is that when I was self-employed for a little bit, I got lucky because of ASCAP, the music publishing, because I had published that one song, She's on Her Own, and they had played it in that one TV show. That alone qualified me to being able to get discount medical insurance through ASCAP. Wow. Now I still had to pay, but it was like, I think it was like $270 a month.
Wow.
And granted, this was 12 years ago, but still.
Do you pay dues to be an ASCAP?
No, you just have to have a thing that you've.
Interesting.
Yeah. So to qualify, you have to have published at least one piece of music.
Right. So you're a therapist, and you could only really work about 20 to 25 hours a week with clients. You're working the rest of the week doing a lot of other things. Yeah. You have to pay for your own insurance. You have to pay for your own office, which in Seattle can run you like $1,000 to $2,000 a month just for a simple small office. You have to pay for malpractice. Right. You have to pay for your own trainings. You don't get any paid vacation. That was the one thing that would really kill me when I was just doing private practice. Was like, I haven't had paid vacation in 20 plus years. Probably the last time I had a job with paid vacation was 20 years ago. Yeah. So, when I'm not working, I'm not getting any money, and everyone needs a vacation. And guess what I did because of that problem?
You had to work more.
I didn't take vacations.
Yeah.
There was probably like a 5 or 6, 7 year period where I didn't have a single week off. I might take like one day off here and there.
Right, because when you're not working, you're not getting money.
You're not getting any money.
Yeah.
So imagine people out there.
Right.
You just like walk away from your job for 2 weeks.
Right.
And you don't get a single penny, and you got to pay bills that month.
Yeah.
Like, where does that money come from?
Right.
Plus, you got student loans.
Yeah.
To get a master's degree in my field is, for tuition alone, is somewhere along the lines of $50,000. To get a doctorate is somewhere on the lines of $140,000.
Yeah.
I have both I have basically 2 masters and a doctorate. If I totaled the entire today's dollars into tuition, it would be probably on the level of $190,000. That's just in tuition.
Right.
Okay. So, and you can't obviously pay that while you're going to school.
No.
So you got to pay that back. And guess what? There's interest, and it's not cheap.
Of course.
So you got to charge a lot, and you can't. So if Cigna is only paying $50 an hour, sometimes that's actually, even though that sounds like a lot, again, you have that, because you only see 20 clients a week, so it's $25 an hour.
Right.
Then you got to figure, I have to pay for my own, and also you don't have retirement. You don't have Social Security. You have to pay into Social Security. Anyway, you have to pay your own taxes. It gets reduced fast, is my point. So the solution to this is what? If we want clients to actually be able to afford therapy, what do we have to do?
Well, I mean, it sounds like, because you were expressing this problem about the Germany or wherever, where socialized medicine was causing these long waits, right?
I mean, according to one anecdote, yeah.
Okay. But it seems like that's one extreme. The other extreme is you subsidize the field. Like you subsidize oil exploration and shit like that.
Right. So in the Germany method, you could stick to that method, but what you would need to do is you would need to increase the taxes and increase the payment.
Yeah.
Because in Germany, from what I understand, and it's the same in the States. So if you want, as a clinician, to make a good living, you have to step outside the state sanctioned area.
Right.
And that presents this huge, or even the insurance area.
Yeah.
And what that does is it essentially just makes therapy an elite thing that only elite people can afford. Well, the way you solve that is by raising taxes and dedicating the money to actually paying. Because right now in Seattle, we have public health agencies and community mental health agencies where there are therapists that are working real hard. And these people are working 40 hours a week, sometimes seeing 25 to 30 clients a week. But they're being paid like $22 an hour.
Yeah.
And they're getting vacation and insurance and whatnot, but still $22 an hour. And they can't wait to get out of that job so they can actually start making money so they can actually pay off their student loans. Well, a solution to that is you triple that pay to $66 an hour. Well, now they're going to stay potentially the rest of their career.
Yeah. You just have to raise the money to do that via taxes, like you're saying.
So that's the solution.
Yeah. And that's what I meant by subsidizing. Although the other part of this is there's clearly still a stigma and a misconception because insurance companies don't feel they have to pay more.
Right. So
right.
So there is culture around expectations around that. And so when the insurance companies didn't pay for birth control pills, that was because they were trying to save money and they were also sexist.
Right.
And they were just trying to save money so that they could actually charge less money to the customers, because that's actually kind of a big deal to them. And when there was enough backlash of just I can't believe that you're paying for Viagra with insurance money, but you're not paying for birth control pills. And there was enough cultural movement. And we could do the same to insurance companies today. If we as a society said, you have to start paying more money for therapy because
we're not going to take it anymore.
But, there's not a lot of political effort in that area.
I struggle with the same sort of problems in my job, in my line of work.
Yeah. Which is what?
Man, come on, quit it. It's not even funny anymore.
It sounds like you're flirting with me on some level.
Hey.
Don't even do that.
No me gusta. No me gusta. I wanted to do this segment where it's like I check in with the listener. Because earlier we were talking about how we're like their friends now. It's like, hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Estás bien? Tú eres muy importante para mí. You know, that kind of thing. Like, just a little personal conversation. Like, how are you doing? Are you feeling comfortable? Sit back.
I don't know what's happening right now. What is happening? I mean, I realize we're at the end of this episode and you're getting a little punchy, but that really takes the cake. So I just want to talk again about Discord because I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
And I think only about, I don't know, a couple dozen of people are really kind of active.
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of people know about Discord.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people hear us talk about it on the podcast and they're just like, yeah, I'll let it go. I really do think that if all of us kind of commit to it or half of the listeners commit to it, it could be really fun.
It could be a really cool community too.
Right. One, you can communicate directly with us.
Right.
People will email me and blah, blah, blah. And you could also like interact with each other. People are posting pictures of their pets, their favorite music, their favorite movies. And it'll be an organic process. We'll kind of see where this goes, but it just seems like, because to me, one of the biggest reasons why I do this podcast is contact with the listeners.
Right.
And we talk to the microphones, we post the episodes, some people comment, but it's not real time where like the live shows we've gone to, the biggest enjoyment of that was actually just face to face with listeners.
Yeah. The post show. So good.
And I think that Discord really allows a very clean, seamless, easy, fun way
Right.
to regularly, in real time, communicate with everybody.
Totes.
There's even a way to do voices, right? You can do like voice channels and just talk, which I'm not fully on board with at this point, but maybe we could be at some point.
Dude, I might even finally reveal my real favorite color on there.
So another thing is that I want to announce is we're going to do our, so this is our first announcement when we're talking about our 11th anniversary.
Oh my gosh.
So if you're still listening at this point, I'm going to guess that you're a fan of the podcast.
Well,
I mean,
can't.
if you're still listening to whatever Berto did about 5 minutes ago.
They're still entranced by that. You wait. They're going to be like, hypnotism works.
So we have an 11th anniversary coming up.
Which is crazy because it was just the 10th anniversary last year.
Yeah, it's weird how that works. And we're going to celebrate it on August 10th, 2019. And here's what we're going to do.
Wait, is that a Saturday?
Yeah.
Can't. I got a matinee of Les Mis.
Yeah. So now, I don't know if you responded to my text, but are you positive
I'm positive.
that day's locked?
That day is locked.
Okay. So on August 10th, 2019, which is my dad's birthday,
Woohoo!
we are going to do a podcast for 11 hours and we're going to live stream it.
11 hours. That's shorter than our usual episodes, but still.
Yeah. Not as long as some of my deep dives, by the way. 17 hours for attachment theory. But anyway.
But it's live. It's live streamed. So you'll finally hear the mistakes we make when Kirk doesn't edit the podcast, which is crazy.
Yeah. So so the past year we did, for our 10 year, we did a live show. People flew in from all over the world and we did a live show and it was super fun. But I just have to say to everyone, I take on 99.9% of the burden to pull that off. And it's so stressful to like plan an event like that all by myself. But even if Berto took half of the blame, so to speak, it's so much work. It's so much stress. And in the end, although great, we only really get to interact with about, a couple dozen people.
Yeah.
If we do a live stream, we could potentially interact with 10,
20 people.
100 times that, And so and the other thing is, it's just so much easier for me to plan.
Yeah.
You know? And also, people out on the survey that I sent out about live shows are just like, oh, well, you know, I don't live in the Seattle area, so
Right.
it's not really.
It's a big trek.
Yeah. But for those who want to fly in, what we're going to do. Or drive in. What we're going to do is we're going to do an after party to the 11-hour show.
Oh my God, an 11th hour show after party. Do you know how not tired we will be?
So, and what I'm thinking is we'll make this a tradition. Every August, we'll do a live stream. And for our 12-year anniversary, we'll do 12 years or 12 hours. So on August 10th, 2019, we're going to do a live stream, I think on YouTube.
Yeah.
We're going to figure out how to do that. It'll be video. And
I'm going to
we'll,
be wearing my gorilla suit.
we're not going to publish the video. We're probably just going to erase it right afterwards. You have to be a part of it live. We will post the episode's audio later on, but you can't, you know, so we're going to do like maybe 4 or 5 episodes in a row. We're just going to record, and we'll try to make special things. We'll try to go to the live stream chat, maybe use Discord actually.
Right.
And, you know, respond to what people are saying. And again,
Oh, we could do a live tough or bluff.
exactly. We could do a poll. Yeah. So, now the after party, we're not sure exactly where it's going to be, but it's going to be in Seattle, and it'll be in the evening on Saturday 10th. So I'm thinking if Berto and I started podcasting, neither of us are really morning people. So say, Berto, you and I start at like 10 o'clock.
Right.
And we go until
11?
Well, that doesn't make any sense. So
No, till 9.
till 9, right. So 11 hours, that's 9 o'clock. So maybe we start at 9
Let's
o'clock.
start at 9 a.m.
So we start at 9 a.m. and we go until 8 o'clock.
Right.
And then you and I drive down to some bar, and we'll meet up with everyone. We can have a drink,
Right.
and we can chat, and we can meet people. So this way we get kind of the best of both worlds. One, I get the less stress because I definitely know how to plan for episodes, and that's not hard. That's work, but I know how to do it well. And we get to meet everyone in the after party.
Yeah, it's the best of both. Now, I have some logistical questions. Like, during these 11 hours, like in a biodome and stuff, like, how do we take showers? How do we do things like have sex? All these things. The camera's always rolling.
Yeah. So,
Oh, wow.
So it's a good question. It's funny how everyone goes there. Like my wife was like, how are you going to like go to the bathroom? Well, we'll figure that out. One, there will be time in between the episodes.
Or like little bottles we can fill up.
Yeah. Speaking of, what's his face, Howard Hughes. But, so the format I'm thinking is we'll do like an episode for an hour and a half.
Right.
There'll be a break where,
Like a 2-hour break.
well, however long it has to be, where we go to the bathroom. If we have to eat, we can do that too, but we won't leave the studio.
Oh, I want to do the thing where I'm eating super spicy food live on air.
Oh, maybe we could do that. Maybe we could do
Yeah.
the Hot Ones challenge at
Yeah.
that time.
And we'll get sued, which is awesome.
Yeah.
We'll call it something else.
Well, yeah, we won't call it Hot Ones challenge.
We'll call it like spicy
Wings challenge or something.
Yeah.
Or spicy soup challenge. I don't know. Whatever. But yeah, that'd be a good thing for the thing. So yeah, hopefully people can tune in and be there with us in the live stream, and also communicate with us over the chat thing, and we can go back and forth. I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun, and I'm really looking forward to the after party and meeting up with people.
Yeah, that'll be awesome.
Some people have been asking, including famous patron Lennon from Ireland. He's thinking about coming to Seattle. Woo! So if you're listening, famous patron Lennon, fly in and make sure that you hang out with us Saturday night.
FPL, we know thee well.
Ooh,
Yay.
that's an interesting phrase there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and if you have any suggestions for episodes or different segments we could do, email us at contact@psychologyseattle.com.
Like, I could talk to you guys the whole time from beginning to end, like this.
What would you do?
I would just, creep everyone out. What is it? What's that
Berto,
thing called? ASMR? ASMR?
Mission accomplished.
ASMR.
Mission accomplished. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.